AIDS Care is able to host this today, and that we are joined by our colleagues Michelle Artz from the American Nurses Association and Ronald Johnson from AIDS United. Just a little bit of housekeeping details. Your lines are all muted during the webinar, but we encourage you to type questions into the questions panel of your dashboard. So on the right of your screen, you should see a chat box or a drop-down box where you can type in questions. And we will have time at the end of the webinar to go over questions and have some discussion with, further discussion with the panelists. This conversation is sponsored by the Association of Nurses in AIDS Care. ANAC members are nurses, nurse practitioners, and other members of the healthcare team worldwide. We are a professional nursing association and others concerned about HIV and HIV-related care, and we've been around since 1987. This is our 30th anniversary. We advocate for policies grounded in human rights approach to care, and we organize those along 4 pillars. Access to care, which will certainly be the focus of today's conversation. The second pillar of our advocacy work is human rights. Third, evidence-based prevention and care. And fourth, issues around supporting the nursing work. I'm going to ask our speakers to all put their phones on mute until it's their time to talk. I hear some background noise. You'll see this slide at the end, but we certainly hope that the take-home message today is this is the time for nurses and other members of the healthcare team and our allies to really get involved and take action to protect healthcare access and healthcare availability for our patients. One way to get involved is to register for AIDS Watch. You can Google that. It's coming up. It's the largest constituent-based visit to legislators in Capitol Hill. That's coming up at the end of March. And also stay tuned for our Take Action emails. You'll see that bullhorn on our emails that ask you to write in or call in to your legislators, and we do this in coalition with our partners. It's my pleasure to acknowledge our partners today who are presenting. We are joined today by Michelle Artz, the Director of the Department of Government Affairs at the American Nurses Association. As you all know, ANA represents the interests of the more than 3.4 million RNs in the U.S. on issues related to healthcare, healthcare access, and the nursing workforce. ANAC is an organizational affiliate of the American Nurses Association. We also will be joined today by Ronald Johnson. Ronald is the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at AIDS United. AIDS United is an organization in Washington, D.C., whose mission is to end AIDS in the United States through grant-making, capacity building, and policy and advocacy. ANAC is a member of the AIDS United Public Policy Committee, along with more than 40-plus other organizations. And through this coalition, we really strengthen our efforts around shared issues of concern, and you'll certainly hear about those today. So we're going to have a few minutes of about 15 to 20 minutes from Rochelle to talk about her perspective on issues and challenges that we should be aware of. Then the same for Ronald. He'll talk about his issues from the HIV/AIDS perspective, and then we'll open it up for questions and dialogue. So it's my pleasure now to turn the mic over to Michelle. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thanks for having me. There is, I think it goes without saying, although I'm going to say it anyway, there's so much uncertainty right now as we look toward the future of our healthcare system in this country, and what is real and what is talk and what is hypothesis about what will become of the Affordable Care Act and any attempts to replace it with other systems and policies. I want to first just start out by saying that ANA has grounded its work in this area in its principles for health system transformation. This is a letter basically that we sent to the Trump administration when he was first elected, and that we've also sent to the Hill, really emphasizing ANA's perspective that universal access to a standard package of essential health services is fundamental. We go into some details about that. Optimizing primary and community-based preventive services, also fundamental, that it's innovative and technology-driven and in terms of hospital-based services. Encouraging mechanisms to stimulate economical use of healthcare services is also important, and I think that's something that the Congress is also interested in. and finally ensuring a sufficient supply of a skilled workforce to provide high quality health care. And so we have these broad bullets, and I could talk more about them, but I don't want to take all my time. I will make sure that Carol has links to our document, our principles, and the sub-bullets, which are more robust. But I want to say that we are taking that broad approach. These are fundamental things that are really important. As you all probably know, ANA was very supportive and a strong force in working to make sure that the ACA was enacted, and so it's really troubling to us as we look at its unraveling. The Congress has begun to make the steps toward repealing, and so some of that has been done through the reconciliation process. President Trump also, as you probably have heard, signed an executive order to reduce the burden of the regulations involved in the ACA. That, I think, everyone is trying to interpret. It's as much a smoke signal that he's very serious and he's doing something as anything else, but it does give some latitude. Executive orders really have authority over what the executive branch can cover, so regulations within the agencies and how they're applied and enforced. This gives some discretion. But it is still not robust in its clarity about what exactly it will mean moving forward. And I think, when we start to look at, obviously there's going to be continued conversation about repealing. There's more work to be done by Congress and the administration in that regard. But the replacement piece is where it really, really gets very, very interesting and even muddier. There is not consensus among the Republican Party about how to move forward. There are some who would be happy just to repeal. More and more, though, there's people who are vocally saying we can't repeal without replacing. We're concerned about this, and there have been a few replacement packages put forward. None of them, I think, full and robust. One came out of the Senate, Senators Collins and Cassidy, just, I believe, day before yesterday, and another one just about maybe 45 minutes ago from Rand Paul in the House. These are heavily focused on, health savings accounts as mechanisms to ensure coverage. The Senate bill is a little more repeals a little less. I would say it allows state discretion in terms of whether they might keep what they have going on in terms of the exchanges in Obamacare, or whether they want to move forward. And I think state discretion is something that you're going to hear more and more about, pressing all these decisions back to the states. So we look to these bills. None of them have a consensus around them. All of them are ideas out in the world, in the wind. We also look to the recent confirmation hearings for the nominee for Health and Human Services, Representative Price, looking at his past packages that he's proposed and also what he's saying in these hearings. So his prospective boss, Mr. Trump, has promised insurance for everybody, and Mr. Price was not really willing to say that he could make that happen at the hearing. He did try to say that individuals covered under the expansion of Medicaid should keep that coverage potentially in a different way. He did express an interest in keeping the pre-existing condition piece and the continued coverage of preventive care. It becomes a little more complicated. I mean, there is a women's health aspect to that, and that was a little less clear. The contraceptive coverage without co-pays, he was not really willing to commit to that. And there is a sense that some of the sickest people might be moved into government-funded high-risk pools. And so these are all some of the big picture things that are happening, but there's no defined plan, and there's a lot of conflicting information out in the world. The Republican Party, the Republicans are having their meeting right now in Philadelphia, their retreat, and my understanding is one of their goals is to come out of that retreat with some kind of consensus about where they want to go in this regard. But I think that we are going to see a lot more confusion before we see clarity. And it becomes really hard then to suss out and read the tea leaves on specific pieces or programs. What's the future of value-based purchasing in this new land? Are they going to continue in that kind of mode of those programs? Are we going to be looking more for fee-for-service? We have all the details around. There's a lot of attention. Another thing that I think may be of interest to the folks on the phone is there's a lot of conversation about drug pricing and transparency of costs in healthcare, and I think that is going to be a major piece of what moves forward, whether in a replacement package, quote unquote, or as part of the user agreement, the PDUFA agreement that will be must-pass legislation, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. I think that is a ripe spot for that conversation to come forward. So we can expect, I think, we're looking at mid-February to early March for confirmation of Mr. Price. And so we have that time frame that we're waiting on. His confirmation, I think, is going to happen, but as you probably have heard, he's been beaten up a bit for some potential conflicts of interest in terms of his investments in healthcare-related interests, and then his legislation to support those kinds of healthcare-related interests has been a major line of questioning from particularly the Democrats on the Health Committee and on the Finance Committee. And I think we're not done hearing about that, but I don't know that it's going to be damaging enough to prevent him from being confirmed. And the Republicans on both of those committees had really rallied around him and feel that he's an excellent choice. He is a physician, orthopedic surgeon, and his wife is an anesthesiologist, and so he has deep roots in healthcare from a physician perspective. And that physician perspective has been reflected, I think, in the policies that he's pursued. So we have that coming on. You know, there's a lot of nursing-specific things that we're beginning to drill down into about how do we have the conversation. I know that workforce is a primary interest of ANA's and, of course, of yours. And you all probably are aware that the Title VIII Nursing and Workforce Development Programs were not, unfortunately, reauthorized at the close of last Congress. We got it through the House, but not through the Senate. And so that still sits there. And we are concerned. I think everybody should be concerned about discretionary spending, particularly for programs that are not reauthorized. I think that could be a very easy kind of just cut it off kind of conversation in this environment. And so that's something that we're watching and concerned about and strategizing about how to engage thoughtfully and make sure that that workforce piece of this is a part of the conversation moving forward. Another piece that I think is probably of interest to the folks on the phone, or maybe is the recently signed executive order by President Trump really reinstating, but I think beyond that, what I'm gathering more and more of, expanding the global gag rule. And so this has to do with basically saying, you know, foreign NGOs have to disavow any involvement with abortion in order to receive U.S. family planning funding. And the version that Trump signed goes a little bit beyond that traditional view. And mind you, this is something that sort of Republican presidents tend to sign back into effect, and Democratic presidents tend to roll back, and it goes back and forth. But Trump's version has expanded the policy not just to U.S. family planning NGOs, but to all global health funding. And so this new rule, my understanding is, rather than impacting about $600 million in U.S. foreign aid, it will affect about $9.5 billion in U.S. foreign aid. George W. Bush had specifically exempted PEPFAR from the global gag rule because it was too complicated to have it meet its prevention and treatment targets with that kind of entanglement and that kind of burden of having to disavow and plan, disavow any kind of abortion connection with every thing that it was contracted with. And so organizations working on AIDS, malaria, maternal and child health are going to have to then make sure that no one involved in their programs involves anything, even of an abortion referral. And I think that is complex. And you know, the more that I read about this and the more that people look at what's been done, the more that it's cause for concern. There's just a great deal now that we're waiting to see. Another thing that we're monitoring is there's been a great deal of sort of anti-vaccination rhetoric and sort of rumbling from the Trump administration. We're very concerned about that, this sort of dismissal of evidence-based science and public health, and that's an area that we're going to be continuing to monitor. Also on the list, really, that I think we all need to pay attention to is there is an attempt or a look at making some changes and reforms to Medicaid and potentially Medicare. And upcoming this next week, the Energy and Commerce Committee is holding a pair of hearings on lowering insurance costs involving Medicaid and reforming Medicaid, and we're expecting some legislation to come out of that from committee leaders that would propose specific reforms. Block granting of Medicaid funds has certainly been a fundamental cornerstone of what folks talk about when they talk about Medicaid, and more discretion to the states. So we have that to look forward to. There's been hearings already on the individual mandate. And I think that, the assertion is that that's just not stabilized health insurance markets and it needs to go away. And coming back to sort of the global gag rule piece, I should have mentioned there was also a bill passed in the House on Tuesday, really codifying into law the Hyde Amendment, which is a 30-year-old restriction preventing certain federal funds from paying for abortion except in medical emergency. So these threads continue, and there's really been a lot of action and conversation. So things are starting to, some things are happening that are more concrete, but by and large, a lot of conversation is continuing to go on. These hearings are continuing to go on, and we're going to see more and more, I don't know, presumably crystallization of what the Republican Party can come together around when it comes to these promises that they've made and these proposals that they put forward about repealing Affordable Care Act and what they think they can deliver for the country in terms of our health care programs writ large. So we are monitoring all of these proposals as they come up, really trying to get at these hearings, trying to make sure that we are clear that nurses hold an immense amount of expertise in the healthcare system, and that we really want to be a resource to folks as they're making some of these decisions. We recognize there's a pretty big gulf between some of the principles that we believe are really important in healthcare and where folks are looking to go, but I do think it's fundamental that we do everything we can to be a part of this conversation and make sure that nurses' voice and expertise is heard. And to that point, I think I'm probably rolling up on my 15-ish minutes. I want to highlight some resources that ANA has put together to try and help keep people informed about all of this breaking information, which is just rolling in almost faster than I feel like we can absorb it. And I'm sure, I'm paid to sit here and try and absorb it every day. I'm sure those of you on the phone are probably feeling just even more overwhelmed by all that is happening and trying to sort it through. We had in December launched a new blog here out of ANA Government Affairs called ANA Capitol Beat. And we have been putting up there our latest articles are really an overview of what happened at the Price confirmation hearing yesterday. We have a new post from Marla Weston, ANA CEO, talking about her experience at the inauguration and the Women's March. She went to both, and I think she had some really interesting takeaways from that. But we're looking at what to expect in the first 100 days. So the Capitol Beat is a great place to say what's going on right now, and we'll give you some perspective from the nursing angle. And then we also have RN Action. So RN Action is our grassroots network, and it's something you can sign up for, and you can receive emails telling you about what's going on and helping give you information and resources to get involved. One of the things that we had really focused on as we were coming into January was trying to make sure that people who were passionate about some of these issues and some of this conversation were really getting in front of their members of Congress. And we started with a very high bar ask, which was go to your member of Congress's district office. And we organized talking points, information, allowed people to express their interest in that, and then really back them up with personalized conversations and resources to help them go and make that visit. But for anyone who cares about healthcare in this country, it is really the moment to share your voice, to share your expertise, and looking at the town hall meetings that your members of Congress are having. If they're they're not going to be home for a little bit here now, but when they're back, they'll be doing more of that. Writing and calls to your members of Congress office. We just had a call-in day last week, and when you're a part of RN Action, you'll get those alerts that will tell you, hey, here's a day for nurses to call in. This is a day where we're trying to really amplify our voices together by unifying in one moment to do that outreach. We do give you suggested sort of talking points and some ideas about things to say, but obviously the more personal you make the conversation, the more impactful it's going to be. I think that's true of all our communications in life, right? If you make a phone call and you talk personally from your heart about what's going on in your life, it's going to have more impact than just a letter or a form letter or just a postcard, just an email that might be less specific to what you really are seeing in your daily life. So where you have some real ideas about how some of these proposals are going to impact you, your patients, the practice setting that you're in, the more that you can share that, the better it will be. And I would say that I'm sure that ANAC as well as ANA would really value, if you have a great story to tell, we can also help amplify that. So reaching out to us to share that is another way, and we can collect some of that information and go to the Hill with it, get to your member of Congress as well. So I think I am now at my 20 minutes. Carol, you can tell me if I'm wrong. But we want to be here to help you make your voice heard, and we are spending a lot of time trying to get the good information out to you, trying to get your voice heard, and I hope that anyone who's interested in being a part of that will sign up for these resources. And beyond that, I'd be more than happy for you to reach out to me if you have specific questions or want to know how you can get more involved, because we really want to make sure that we do everything we can to impact this conversation as it moves forward. That was a lot to say. I hope it was somewhat helpful, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Michelle. And I do want to point out to the audience that we will continue to post these links, post connections. Please go on to the ANA website and sign up for those resources, but also look for our emails because there'll be direct links to these opportunities as well. We're going to hear a little bit more about some of these upcoming opportunities after Ronald's presentation. I'm going to turn this call over now to Ronald for the next 15, 20 minutes to really talk about further drilling down on some of the things that Michelle talked about, and in particular some of our concerns about how some of these proposals will affect the HIV/AIDS community. So Ronald, it's my pleasure to now turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Carol, and I really very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today. I certainly appreciate and following Michelle's very good presentation, and I'm hopefully will build upon that presentation. I want to say a quick word about AIDS United. AIDS United is a national organization. Our mission is to end the HIV/AIDS epidemic in New York City. I'm sorry, in the United States. Getting my roots in New York City blending in. AIDS United mission is to end the epidemic in the United States, and we do that through strategic grant making, capacity building, technical assistance, formative research, and policy and advocacy. And the Public Policy Committee that Carol mentioned in her opening is the membership arm of AIDS United. It is also the policy setting arm of AIDS United. And we are very grateful that ANAC is a member of the Public Policy Committee and is involved in setting policy and advocacy strategies for what is really one of the largest coalitions of AIDS organizations in the country. Want to talk as we look at what the Trump administration and the next few years mean, particularly for HIV and AIDS. Want to talk a little bit about an overview of the administration itself and key positions that impact HIV and AIDS, starting with, and Michelle talks about the nomination of Representative Tom Price, Dr. Tom Price, to be the Health and Human Services Secretary. This is certainly significant. Health and Human Services oversees the vast majority of domestic HIV programs. So this is an appointment that has very much importance to the HIV/AIDS community and HIV/AIDS work. As Michelle noted, his confirmation hearings are going forward, getting a rough sledding, but I agree that the eventual confirmation is pretty much assured, even though he will and is going through and will go through some very tough questioning. Mr. Price is one of, as being a member of the House, he was one of the strongest opponents of the Affordable Care Act. Indeed, he introduced a bill, Empowering Patients First Act, that was intended to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. That legislation, of course, did not proceed, but it does represent a reflection of Mr. Price's views on what could replace the Affordable Care Act. He also, in the past, has been a supporter of block granting Medicaid. He evaded that question during his confirmation hearing so far, but he is on record as supporting the block granting of Medicaid. The next appointment that I want to just flag is Seema Verma as the CMS Administrator. This appointment is important because CMS oversees Medicare and Medicaid and has much of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. So, and relating to Mr. Trump's first day executive act order, calling for some administrative actions around undermining, really, the Affordable Care Act. The CMS Administrator, Seema Verma, when she's on board, it would be an important player in carrying out executive actions, even in advance of congressional actions to repeal. The executive actions that could be taken to undermine the Affordable Care Act. And as noted, Michelle noted that Mr. Trump has already signed an executive order that would begin to undermine the Affordable Care Act. So Seema Verma is likely to be a key player in those administrative actions. Want to also highlight the nomination and the confirmation hearings that are underway for the OMB Director, Mick Mulvaney. OMB, of course, is very, very critical to the budget and appropriations. They manage that within the administration. Mr. Mulvaney is currently a member of the House of Representatives from South Carolina. He's a founding member of the very conservative Freedom Caucus in the House. He's a Tea Party enthusiast. He is a strong supporter for increased defense spending, and he supports paying for those defense increases by cutting non-defense spending. And I think this is important. Michelle already noted the threat to discretionary spending that is coming up, particularly non-defense spending. So the views of Mr. Mulvaney on a budget and appropriations will be very critical. And as I said, he has on record as being a fiscal conservative and strong supporter of increased defense spending. The other position I want to quickly highlight is Andrew Bremberg, who's been appointed to be the Domestic Policy Council Chair. I highlight this because the Office of National AIDS Policy sits within the Domestic Policy Council. So Mr. Bremberg is likely to play a role in whatever future there is for ONAP, including the director. There have been no indications so far from the administration as to the status of ONAP or the appointment of a new director. So Mr. Bremberg is, again, a key player in that and a person we need to be keeping an eye on in terms of what the administration will be doing for HIV/AIDS. The last personnel issue that I want to highlight, again, within the Domestic Policy Council, the person responsible for health issues, Katie French Talento. Katie began her work in HIV at Whitman Walker. She is a trained epidemiologist, very, very knowledgeable about HIV/AIDS issues. when she worked for Senator Coburn. She was very much involved in Ryan White reauthorizations, so she's very, very familiar with HIV issues, including the Ryan White program. So she will be a key player also. Looking at, I want to quickly highlight the Congress. Obviously, the Congress is going to be very, very important when we look at what's ahead for HIV AIDS. In terms of the makeup of Congress, Republicans have obviously, as we all know, retained control of both houses, although the size of their majority shrank slightly in both houses, but they do have control, and they have presumably a president who will sign their bills. So the makeup of the new Congress is very critical. In terms of leadership, most of the changes have been in the House. There will be a new budget committee chairman. We don't know who that chairman will be yet, because the current chairman is Tom Price, who is obviously waiting for his confirmation to be HHS secretary. So presumably upon his resignation, there will be efforts and an election to appoint a new budget committee chairman. Diane Black from Tennessee is considered to be a leading candidate for new budget committee chair in the House. There is a new appropriations chairman in the House, Rodney Frelinghuysen from New Jersey, and a new Energy and Commerce Committee chair, Greg Walden, Republican from Oregon. And Energy and Commerce is important because that oversees health issues, including HIV, in the House of Representatives. Going on the Senate side, not much changes in the leadership. In terms of the Appropriations Committee, that's the biggest change with the retirement of Senator Barbara Mikulski. Patrick Leahy of Vermont will become the new ranking member for the Appropriations. Appropriations, as Michelle noted, is very, very critical, serious threats to discretionary spending overall, non-defense spending in particular. So certainly we at AIDS United, along with most advocates in this field, are paying very close attention to the appropriations process. You may know that the FY 2017 process, the current fiscal year, is not completed. We are operating under a continuing resolution that expires in April 28th. So Congress does need to complete the appropriations process for this year, as well as beginning to work on next year's FY 2018 appropriations. And the pressure to reduce spending for domestic programs while increasing spending for defense programs will be an issue that we will need to look at very, very closely and be involved in. Michelle gave an excellent overview of the situation facing the Affordable Care Act, the repeal and replace, so I won't go much into that. But I do want to point out that with the uncertainty, and as Michelle said, that's the key word throughout this process still is uncertainty. But with the uncertain and very tenuous status of the Affordable Care Act, the importance of the Ryan White program is even more magnified, and certainly in terms of the status of HIV programs. So we will be stressing to Congress how important the Ryan White program is and the services of the Ryan White program. It is an unauthorized program. We at AU are not looking to reauthorize the Ryan White program in this Congress. We think the situation politically is too tenuous to go forward with reauthorizing, but we will be advocating very, very strongly the importance of the Ryan White program. It needs to be in place. It needs robust funding. So that will be a priority item for AIDS United. Want to also note the block granting of Medicaid. Michelle did mention that. We think this is going to be a critical issue in the weeks and months ahead. Both the White House and the congressional majority, particularly in the House, are very, very determined to move forward with block granting of Medicaid. We at AIDS United think this is a bad policy and will oppose it vigorously. We feel that this will only lead to situations where benefits are cut, eligibility is reduced and shrunk in the guise of giving flexibility to the states. We need to make it very, very clear that this is really an attempt to reduce federal spending for Medicaid and reduce the burden, the federal burden, but shifting that burden to the states and also onto consumers. And either the impact will be either reduced benefits for beneficiaries of Medicaid or people being cut from the roll or denied getting onto the roll even though they otherwise would be Medicaid eligible. So the block granting of Medicaid is a critical issue. Now, we're coming towards the end, so I do want to talk about what can we do, and to echo Michelle's stressing the importance of advocacy and our involvement in advocacy. Now more than ever, HIV/AIDS advocates, healthcare advocates must be able to be strongly involved in efforts over the next couple of months and probably years in terms of the goals and priorities that we have, whether it's healthcare overall or HIV-specific issues. We need to be very, very involved. And that involvement includes working at the state and local level. I think it is going to be very important that we as HIV advocates inform our state legislatures about the issues and how the federal issues will play out at the state level. And Medicaid, the block granting of Medicaid, I think is a good example of we need to educate governors, we need to educate state legislators as to what the real implications of block granting Medicaid could be and likely will be if it goes forward, and what it means for the state. So educating our state legislators and governors is going to be very, very important. And more than ever, we do need AIDS Watch. The dates of AIDS Watch 2017 are March 27 and 28. We need this year's AIDS Watch to be the largest, most visible AIDS Watch. We need to demonstrate to Congress, we need to demonstrate to the administration the determination that we have to continue to move forward and to make sure that the federal response to HIV continues to move forward. We have the ability to end the epidemic. We have the science, we have demonstrated programs, we have increased access to care, all of that progress leading to ending the epidemic. We cannot be deterred from that path. So it really is going to be very, very important in light of the kinds of priorities that the current congressional majority and the administration appears to be heading. Even in the context of still uncertainty, there are certain contours of the policy that we know, and those policies are not conducive to what it will take to end the epidemic. So getting involved, whether it's in AIDS Watch and being visible in the halls of Congress, talking to your state legislators, when your local congressmen are home and working in their district, making an effort to contact them when they have town hall meetings, showing up at those meetings. It's very, very important that we be active, we be involved, and we are all in this together and working together. I am very, very confident that we will begin to turn things around from what may seem to be the directions in which they're heading now to ensure that the health care of all Americans, the health care of people living with or vulnerable to HIV is maintained as a priority for our country. And with that, I really think I am looking at my stopwatch, and I'm just about out of time. So, Carol, thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. Both Ronald and Michelle, stay with me. We have some questions. I will remind the audience to please type in the chat box any questions you have, and we already have a few. I also want to point out AIDS Watch, as Ronald talked about. It's coming up. Just Google it, AIDS Watch. You'll see more information on it. Many ANAC members participate, and we hope even more this year. It's coming up March 27th and 28th. Go online, learn more about it, and register and be part of it. It's important to have the voice of nurses. Nurses, continue to be the most trusted source of information, and that includes health policy information. Our voices must be heard. So whether through AIDS Watch or through other activities that we'll be keeping you informed of, please represent. So we have a couple of questions. One is very timely. Like we said, this is happening as we speak, right? So the question: Trump is expected to sign an executive order today to strip federal funding from sanctuary cities, Philadelphia being one of them, who wants to protect immigrants. Most of these cities receive Ryan White funding, which falls under federal funding. Is this a real risk, and how can we intervene on these issues? On this issue. So how do we address executive orders, especially threatening federal funding when federal funding is so important to all of our work?
I think, again, on issues like that, it's going to be very, very critical that we weigh in with members of Congress to let them know what the impact of these executive orders might be and likely will be in our communities, to get members of Congress, particularly Republican members, to speak up and to highlight what the effects of these policies are in issues like that. And I'm glad the questioner made the connection to the Ryan White program, because those connecting the dots issues may not be so readily apparent when you see or hear about the executive orders. So far, I have not seen the one pertaining to sanctuary cities, but so far many of the executive orders that Mr. Trump has issued are really vaguely worded, and I think Michelle used the word more smoke signals than any substance. But so we have to flesh out all of the implications that might be, and to make those implications known to members of Congress, to our local officials, newspapers. we have to increase the visibility of the impact, the potential impact, because so far it is very easy for members of Congress to say, well, this is not going to have a real impact on my district or in my state, and we have to show them that they are wrong on those counts.
So, Ronald, I could not agree more, and I think when we can all see the battle that's going on right now between the kind of political messaging and talking points and the details of what things really mean, and those details are really getting lost. Just so clearly, and I think that you're absolutely right. The vast majority of people won't make a connection between, this executive order and some of the very real and important programs and services that are at play in these communities, and what the ripple effects could be if those are impacted. And so I think the more that we all can together raise visibility for what the reality is, not just the talking point, not just the smoke signal, but like if this moves forward in the way that it seems they intend, it's going to have a lot of consequences that I think the vast majority of people across the country just don't even have any sense of. There's, broadly maybe a sense of dissatisfaction with some things in our country, in our society, and people like the decisiveness with which this president is moving to address some things that maybe they have a high level of discomfort with for their personal experience, or even just for, what they in their gut believe is the case. But the facts that go along with some of this stuff in terms of what it really means to make these changes and decisions are not fully understood, and it is hard to break through the division that I think we've got going on in this country, and the just the noise. So this is where, coming back to where I think we're going to keep coming back to, where your voice is really needed, and obviously as associations that seek to represent you all and your interests in these important issues, we're going to do our best to amplify these things, but we really need you.
Just a point of clarification here, what is a sanctuary city? So I'll give it a stab, and then Ronald and Michelle, please correct me. So sanctuary cities are cities that have proclaimed that their police departments would not be involved in stopping people, asking for their papers, participating in deporting. In other words, doing the job of the Immigration Service. So that is my understanding of what a sanctuary city is, where a mayor and the city government has said that their police department would not check on immigration status of people just randomly, or when they are stopped. Is that a pretty not do the job of immigration? Is that pretty accurate for what a sanctuary city is?
Yes, I think that's very, very accurate.
I agree.
That the police departments would focus on their job of keeping their citizens safe and not doing the job of immigration and deportation. So here's another question. Go ahead.
No, that's fine.
Yep. So here's another question. I think we need some more description on what is block granting, and what is block granting. How is that different from what Medicaid is now? And again, what does that really mean for patients, particularly I would say in poor states like in the South? But can you talk a little bit more about what is block granting?
Yes, block granting, currently Medicaid is an entitlement program. If you meet the eligibility of Medicaid, you are a beneficiary. Now, the way Medicaid is structured, it is implemented at the state level. So there are certain broad federal guidelines for eligibility, but each state does have the flexibility to create their actual eligibility criteria. And so that if a person, low-income person, meets that eligibility, becomes a Medicaid beneficiary, the spending and what it takes to cover that person, the dollars that it takes to cover that person and collectively all Medicaid appropriations the government is obligated to spend. It's mandatory spending. Under a block grant, each state would get an annual allotment of funds. And if that allotment runs out, then they don't get any more money that year from the federal government. So it is conceived as a way of controlling the cost of Medicaid at the federal level, because the federal government can then determine what the allotment to each state will be. And as I said, if the demand at the state level, because we know people get sick, low-income people get sick, and they need care. And if the state is no longer able to provide that care through their Medicaid allotment, then they either have to kick in the funds to cover that deficit, or the person goes without care. And I think that's as stark as it can be, and we really need to realize that those are the stark realities under a block granting scenario, and which is one of the reasons AIDS United is very, very opposed to the block granting of Medicaid.
I want to underscore something that Ronald touched on in that conversation. I think so. It's, right now the states share some of the cost with the federal government, and it's, again, as he said, it's mandated. There's coverage that they then have to provide. And once we move into block granting, it becomes the key word, I think, is flexibility. So under a block grant, the states would have a lot more flexibility to decide who qualifies and for what services. The federal government would be giving a chunk of money, and the state would have the ability to, a lot of freedom in terms of what kinds of coverage they would offer to whom and when. And the sense is that we could see a lot of loss of access and coverage. That guarantee of coverage would be gone. It's deeply concerning to us here at ANA as well.
And one of the accomplishments, or one of the accomplishments in process of the Affordable Care Act, was a focus on prevention and wellness, and a focus on managing chronic diseases rather than waiting for the escalation to super sick ER visits and uncompensated care that we experienced in the past. And I think the concern for many of us is that block granting is going to completely reverse that trend, in the sense of, if states have limited pots of money, particularly poor states like states in the South where the HIV epidemic is so prevalent, states with limited pots of money are going to have to make decisions on how do they handle care for the poor. And one can only assume that that's going to mean a greater limitation on those who are eligible, as well as, even for those who remain eligible, the ability to get preventative care or early management of chronic disease could easily be chipped away in a very severe fiscal environment, and instead looking at that serious acute care that we know doesn't serve anyone well, including hospital systems. And I think that's where nurses and healthcare workers joining with hospital systems to really think about, what does this really mean? Yes, we hear these words, state flexibility, but really what it means is increasing uncompensated care, people being stuck in ERs, all those horrors of the past, going back to those and going back to them with a real vengeance. So,
and Carol, I also want to highlight and build upon what you said. An impact will be on childless adults, low-income adults. They are not eligible for Medicaid, even under traditional current Medicaid programs. Childless adults are generally not eligible. It was Medicaid expansion under the ACA that brought childless adults into the Medicaid system. And if we go into a block grant scenario, that population is going to be almost at the top of the list of being denied services.
Right.
The other thing that I think has been a part of this conversation around Medicaid is a work requirement. And I don't know whether you have more insight on that, Ronald, than I do, but I do think that this is another kind of, when you hear about block granting, you hear about the things that people are talking about wanting to impose on the Medicaid program, a certain amount of you need to be working or pursuing work as part of your receiving of these benefits. And I think that that can get, very, that's a philosophical question that I think people might have a variety of opinions on, but it can get really complicated for people. At what point is somebody not healthy enough to be pursuing work? What will be where will the lines be for some of these states, and what will the interpretation be in terms of your ability to actually engage in those programs that they want or in that work? When are you allowed to be too sick to be pursuing that? What qualifies, whether it be mental health or, kind of the devil in the details of that philosophy, whether you feel good about it or not, I think could have a major impact on this already very vulnerable population of people.
Right.
I echo that very much, and I draw that back to Seema Verma, who, as I noted, is the new incoming CMS administrator. She was a key player in Indiana's Medicaid expansion waiver, and that had what many of us consider very harsh work requirements. So with her role as CMS administrator and as an architect of those work requirements, that will be a critical issue to look at going ahead.
Right. So we're at the end of our hour, and we have many questions that we haven't gotten to, including some of the discussion that we just started to touch on with work requirements and some of the details of Medicaid eligibility. It's certainly, we understand that we need to have more of these and to have them on a regular basis, including around particular topics. I'm going to read this last question. I'm not going to, we don't have time to answer it, but I just want to show how this intersection between all of these issues are relevant, and it sort of makes me think about a future conversation that we need to hold. I believe that an essential part of nurses' advocacy and health policy should include environmental advocacy. For example, preservation and enforcement of the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. So the questioner asked if we could speak about that, and we certainly can, but unfortunately not in this hour. But stay tuned. We will be holding other conversations like this, particularly about these intersectional issues that talk about environment, that talk about sanctuary cities, etc. We have a lot to pull apart and then set up action plans. But again, I would encourage you all, I thank our presenters so much. Your expertise and your insight is really invaluable. And I would encourage our listeners and to AIDS Watch. That concludes our call, and I really thank you all for your participation. Stay tuned.
Thanks so much.
Bye, all.